Uh, I'll go ahead and get started. Thanks, Serena, for recording. Okay, great. So everyone, welcome to our 6th Regenerative Speaker Series. My name is Natalie Topa. I work with the World Food Program as the Global Advisor for Regenerative Resilience. Why do we focus on regenerative resilience? WFP has resources and programs all over the world, and we are trying to always explore how can we not do different things, but do different things differently. A lot of our programs support farmers, smallholders. I know Salala's here, but in so many of our programs, especially African context, Middle East, we have communities that have livestock rearing and pastoralism as their traditional livelihood strategy. And that's a very viable, important livelihood strategy for so much of the world. But we are starting to see some of the impacts of the way that animals are managed in the landscape and how that might contribute to ecological degradation. Hey, Gladys. So we have here today Precious Phiri, who is a globally renowned expert in holistic management. I called it holistic rangeland management, which it's often referred as. Hi, Precious. But the latest name, hi Stephen, is actually holistic management. That is a management framework that the Savory Institute has developed. And Allan Savory, who I'll talk about in a minute, is also a globally renowned person within the global regenerative movement on how we can leverage animal nutrient and traction in the landscape to heal landscapes. So Precious Phiri is a protege of Allan Savory. Allan Savory is from Southern Africa, where he has been working for decades, and I'll talk about in a minute. But Precious Phiri is someone who's been learning from Allan, and he has been her mentor for many years. And she has now really emerged over the last decade as a really key figure in training pastoralists in how to think in a different way about livestock management and how we can address ecological collapse with the use of animals. So I am going to be presenting the first part of this presentation. Holistic management is something that I care about greatly. It has everything to do with soil health. And I think, did we just admit someone? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll be giving a presentation for around 20 minutes. I'll hand it over to Precious, who will present for about another 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So I am going to share my screen. Hold on. And someone will have to indicate to me if you're able to properly see my screen. Everyone can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the reason we're actually having this call is because last September, I live in Kenya and I've been here for in East Africa for 20 years. This August will be 20 years. And one huge benefit of living in East Africa is we have many places like Kenya, Tanzania, and others where people can go on a wildlife safari and see animals in the wild. Now, I went last September with a friend of mine on the safari, and there was some things that were just so clear that I reached out to Precious, whom I've known for years. We've been friends for years, and since then she's had 2 beautiful children, and we've always remained in touch on these topics. So I'm calling this presentation the Safari of Soils. And for those who speak Swahili, safari means journey, right? So why I'm calling it the Safari of Soils is because soils are always on a journey. Our whole planet is a conveyor belt of nutrient shifting, moving, geological material moving through the land, settling in some places, scouring valleys. And so soils are always on a safari. Now, these were observations that I had made on this safari, the wildlife safari, of ancient versus contemporary soils and how different herds within the same location impact the soil and the So a lot of this movement around regenerative grazing or holistic management, also sometimes referred to as holistic rangeland management, was inspired by this man named Allan Savory. I've dropped a link to his TED Talk, his very famous TED Talk, in our chat. So I encourage everyone to take a look at that in your own time. But Allan Savory was a biologist who was living and working in Southern Africa for decades. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to admit people coming in. Maybe if Serena or others, I'm not sure if you're able to admit external people.
Sure,
so Allan, thanks. Allan was a biologist who was helping governments in Southern Africa grapple with the issues of ecological degradation, especially where you had animal herds, including livestock and wild herds. One of the things that Allan had concluded was that elephants, large elephants, which are huge soil organisms, macroorganisms, were causing major destruction in the land. And so with his initiative, he had encouraged governments in Southern Africa to cull or eliminate elephants because of what he perceived as their destructive value. And because of that initiative, over 40,000 elephants were killed during that period. Now, when you see the TED Talk, Allan describes that this is the greatest regret of his life that he will carry with him to the grave, because when they started to cull those elephants, they recognized that the landscapes that the elephants roamed in wildly were even worse off when we reduced the numbers of those elephants. So then Allan embarked on a lifelong journey to undo that harm and damage that he had done, and to help understand how herds, as they interact with the land, can actually be a healing mechanism.
Sorry, Natalie, I think we don't see your presentation anymore. I don't know if it's just my problem, but...
No, we lost the presentation.
Sorry, I'm having some... Oops, 1 second. Thank you for letting me know. Just having some technical difficulties here. You can see it now?
Yes, it's back.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Okay. So this is a photo that I took from a hot air balloon ride on my safari. I'm trying to minimize this little screen. So I took this photo. I was in a hot air balloon ride. I took this photo. And what's so clear, as you're in a wildlife conservation area where no livestock, domestic livestock, are allowed to graze, but millions of animals every day, week, month are passing through this landscape, is that although there are not many trees because of the natural ecological context here, it's a big savanna, but the grasses where there are trees are healthy. You don't see massive, meandering or forced erosive meandering of the river. So I'm looking out at this landscape, which is an ancient landscape, and why is it so healthy? Why is it so intact? And it's because the animal herds are constantly regenerating the soil, the grasses, and supporting hydrological function. So this is a completely intact landscape. Now, when you listen to Precious and when you watch Allan Savory's presentation, one of the main themes is that wild herds are moved by predators. You have these ferocious predators that are, threatening to attack large wild herds. And as a virtue of protection, wild herds bunch together in tight packs. And they're bunched together in a concentrated manner, and they move from one place to another, but they're constantly moving and not just staying in one place. Now, with pastoralism, humans, one of the things about humans is we can be lazy and we don't want to move or do more work than we have to. My supervisor's on the call, so I should maybe point that out. But, really a pastoralist often, and for many of my colleagues in the African context, we'll see a pastoralist who will stand and roam with the animals, but it's often a he, mostly a he. The pastoralist will stand and allow the animals to spread out and graze all the way down until the grass is gone, right? And that is a very different pattern than what's happening with wild herds. And so that disrupted pattern of pastoral movement of animals in the landscape is a total departure from the way that animals as large soil organisms are contributing to the cycling of nutrients and protection of that hydrological flow. So just to give you an example, when wildlife are grazing, they're constantly manuring and dunging and urinating on their food supply. So they have to move. They take a few bites of the grass and then they move, take a few bites of the grass and move. And by the way, if you know about grass, it's that top 1/3 of the blade of grass that's the sweetest, the freshest, the newest, the most nutritious, the seed holding and bearing. And it's usually that top bit that the animals take and then move on. Whereas grazed animals are often remaining in the same location and biting not only the 1/3, not only the 2/3, but all 2/3, second third, but all the way down to the root systems. And that can even be with different animals, right? Browsers and grazers have very different patterns. When I see donkeys in the landscape, often for those who are familiar with donkey grazing behavior, they can even pull up the roots of those perennial and annual grasses. And so with the wild animals, they are able to take what they need, dung and manure, and dimple the land. When we talk about the traction, their little hooves are pressing into the ground, which, create little micro zai pits. For those familiar with our land restoration and WFP, half moon zai pits are all ways that we can catch and store water in the soil, just allowing it to run off. But with grazed animals, often they will go all the way down and inhibiting the ability of those perennial and annual grasses to recover. So if you understand the root systems of plants, when you cut a plant, a grass or a tree, you have the equivalent dieback under the soil. So imagine if you have that 1/3, that top 1/3 of a grass that's chomped down, 1/3 of the roots, the ends of the roots, dies back and pushes carbon into the soil. So because of that, animals for millions of years, millions of animals for millions of years in these wildlife conservation zones like the safari are constantly nibbling and pushing carbon back into the soil. And what happens is this creates a sponge underneath the soil because plants consume sunshine and they sweat sugar. They sweat sugar on their leaves, on their roots, and those sugars are called exudates. They're carbohydrates and carbon that feed soil organisms. So the soil organisms are under the soil waiting for that plant to consume sunshine, photosynthesize, and they start eating those sugars. Those sugars attract them, and then they start to protect the roots and create a lot of the digging, the ventilation, so that water and oxygen can reach far down into the soil. This is what creates a sponge effect, that spongy, bouncy, absorbative character of the soil, which allows water to infiltrate and percolate. So when rain falls on land that is intact and spongy with deep root nets, that water is going to infiltrate and percolate down, feeding lower soil levels and also recharging groundwater. But what happens is that when we have a situation where we have vegetation loss, overgrazing, deforestation, then what we're doing is destabilizing the hydrology because that water can no longer infiltrate and it starts to slide off in erosion. It starts as sheet erosion and then rill erosion and then gully formation. There's actually 6-7 steps of erosion. But the point is that water is being released artificially. That's not it, the system has been broken. And so now that water, those volumes of water that are not soaking in are released, sliding off, but they're also ripping the soil away from them. And if you know about soil turbidity, which means all those particles of sand and aggregate and gravel that are flowing with that water are scouring and digging deeper and deeper rivets and rills and gullies. And so flooding and soil erosion are hand in hand. What's left behind then is a crusting of the land. and drought because there's no moisture security. And then what happens is whatever, new grasses are left behind in a pastoral context is the only food available. And so those animals are going to really eat anything that they can that has appeared despite those crusting conditions. And then, of course, again, that starts the cycle again. So, I don't know, Precious, if it was Allan, if it was the quote of Allan Savory, or if it's just the quote that the global regenerative movement refers to talk about this. We always say it's not the cow, it's the how. I know there are a lot of conversations globally about the role of animals and the meat industry in climate change. So there's nothing wrong with the animals. It's how humans are organizing animal energy in the landscape that's the problem. So there are many people who are vegetarians or try to reduce meat. For me, the question is, sorry, can we mute all mics? Thanks. The question is not how do we, there is no ecosystem void of animals. I want to make that very clear. Any healthy forest, rainforest, savanna is not void of animals. Animals are key parts of the ecosystem for cycling nutrients. They're consuming biomass and releasing that back into the system to nurture and nourish the soils and organisms. So it's in a regenerative cycle. Now, this photo, I think this little box may be blocking it. Uh-oh. So these two photos are within just 1 or 2 kilometers away from each other. But here on the left, we have domestic livestock. So this is where cows graze and goats. And you can see not only how dry and short the grass is, but how that hydrology is moving, and all of this erosion is now exposing aggregate and subsoils and tearing away that fertile topsoil that is the food system for the next cycle of grass. Here on the right side, we see elephants, which, these photos are not to scale. You can't see how huge these elephants are, but you can see how big and tall and intact and dense the grasses are. So you have to understand that under the soil, those root nets are very deep. So this is also in the same area, and you can see on the left side here, this is where the Maasai tribe are allowed to graze their animals. So they take the cows and the goats in and around all of these trees. There is some deforestation of the trees as well for domestic fuel, for construction of homes, manyatas. And you can see the impacts when that spongy effect of the soil is lost and water is just forced. It's released in a forceful way artificially, and it starts to degrade all of the soil. Now, on the other side of the road, so here we have all of this hydrological destabilization, and on the right-hand side, this is directly opposite on the other side of the road, this is what we call pedestalization. So creating pedestals. When you see pedestals of soil, or maybe a tree on a pedestal, that means soil has been eroded all around it. Now you can see a busted gabion here, which is twisted and broken. So this is the natural path of water that was flowing in the landscape, but now that water behavior has become so violent, so extreme, so erosive and scouring and ripping away those topsoils. And I would, take a look at the soil that's here. You can see the deep root nets that have been holding together these soils for thousands and millions of years, deep root nets stitching together the soils, keeping them structured and in place. But now with the violent water behavior, it's starting to really open up these gullies. And now this is, you can see here in the background where we have 2 elephants, this is now the erosion from the adjacent land misuse. So even though here we have animals that are doing what they're supposed to be doing, the destructive adjacent behavior is destabilizing the hydrology so much that it's causing a soil disaster. And these soils will continue to wash away and cut deeper gullies, which are also a danger for the wildlife. And what I also wanted to point out is, we talk obviously in WFP and our humanitarian industry about forest displacement. And I just want to reiterate something that I always say, which I think is highlighted here, is that when we have forest displacement of water, like we see here, it's a forest release. Then that leads to the forest displacement of soils, because the soils are now being washed away. And the forest displacement of soils, as we've seen all over the world throughout history, the forest displacement of soils can contribute to the forest displacement of people. The health of any society lies within the top few inches of its healthy, fertile topsoils. And that can be tied to peace, conflict, instability, economic strife, and all of those things. So what are we talking about so what is the answer? The answer is, how can we turn a degenerative, a collapsing landscape into one that is returned to a regenerating, cyclical, restorative pattern? And this can happen on, many scales. I was just in South Africa earlier this year on a farm where we were designing to do this on a medium-sized South African farm. But even pastoralists in Somalia, Wajir, I remember working in Wajir where this was being tried out. So this is, whether it's the governance of this is really the key. And I know that Precious will touch on this, but basically, whether it's through social contracts among pastoralists, defining a pattern in which they agree they will graze the animals in a regenerative way, or on a farm, it might be done with fencing or other ways that you move animals in that same bunching pattern from one area to a next, to a next, to the next, to allow for that constant recovery and injection of carbon back into the soil. So what we're doing here is mimicking natural patterns, the natural innate behavior of the animals in the absence of that predator. We have to push them back into that pattern in the absence of the predator to get that bunching where they're applying their nutrient back in the soil and creating miniature earthworks to catch and hold that water as well as organic material. So the way that we manage animal energy on the land will help in nurturing those natural cycles. And just to give you an example, if I have one cow and I take that cow every single day to the river, that path of that cow will become degraded. However, if I have 100 cows and I send them all for one day to the river, then that same land is going to be regenerated or restored. So it's the same amount of animal energy. It's 100 units times 1. And of course, you're not going to have 100 cows and only send them once in a year to the river. But I just want you to imagine that the distribution of that animal energy in the landscape can be either a positive or a negative in its impact on the land. So there's another great quote by Allan Savory that is so important for us, all of those of us who are working in arid and dry zones that are impacted by desertification, drought. It is not drought that causes bare ground, but bare ground that causes drought. So, if you have a landscape that has trees, intact vegetation, when drought conditions arrive, that land will be far less impacted than that which is overgrazed, deforested, vulnerable. And now the impacts of that drought really, finish off the ability of that land to recover. So I love this quote, and whether it's our gardens, our farms, our homesteads, landscapes, watersheds, we have to understand that we have to eliminate the bareness of the soil. And I mean perennial trees, perennial bushes, as well as perennial grasses and annual grasses. So that was just my intro into this topic. I'm going to hand it over to Precious. Let me stop sharing. But I just wanted to give you that sort of overview and from my experience and observations. And hold on, let me just escape here. And now we can hand it over to Precious, who's going to talk more specifically about this work and her experience in working with communities in different regions to use their animals to heal the hills. Precious, let me turn it over to you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Nat. Hi, everyone. My name is Precious Phiri. Nat, that was really wonderful, and thank you for giving us a very good overview. It certainly makes my work easier. And also, I understand that we are all in different time zones, so I hope everybody is good and comfortable. I'm talking to you from Zimbabwe, working with communities, but I'm also a trainer and facilitator in regenerative grazing, holistic management, regenerative agriculture, working with rural communities. I founded a local organization here called Igugu Trust, which works and functions in the drylands of Hwange. We are also near wildlife, near the Hwange National Park, actually in the zone of 4 big national parks in 4 countries. So I do think that what Natalie has shared and what I also have to share will relate, and I hope that it relates to you also in your different dryland regions or seasonal rainfall regions. Over time, you'll notice that I prefer seasonal rainfall to dryland because that almost means different things, but I guess we'll get into it later. I'm going to share my screen. Please let me know if you can see anything.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, okay. All right, let me do this. Now?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And sorry, Precious, we've got 15, 20 minutes. Well, hopefully we get at least 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. So we just need to be mindful of time. It's completely
15
my
minutes.
Sorry about
15 minutes is good. So
Okay.
that will be that'll be 3 o'clock on my time. If I'm
no,
correct.
3:45 or 2:45.
2:45. Okay. Yes, 2:45. Okay, that's good. All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to dive in straight into my presentation. Okay, so I'm based in Hwange, and I think like most people, dryland, very extreme droughts and minimal rainfall. And I think the climate crisis has really been catching up with us year after year. We find that the rainfall patterns are super unreliable, and we will need lots of different tools in our toolbox of regenerative agriculture to manage to the specific needs of our own regions. And I think if we look Africa-wide, most of you will really agree that most of our continent is really blessed with the drylands. And so as I do believe that this is really a relevant topic today for most of us, and pastoralism is central to what we use for our livelihoods. And where I work, actually, we are agro-pastoralists. That means we do both cropping and livestock rearing, large, small, and medium livestock, and donkeys that Nat dreads so much. And the general problem and challenge in our environments, and if I'm too fast, please let me know. I'm also trying to make the most of the time that we have, is poor ecological health, low crop yields, and definitely degenerating landscapes. So every time we lose water and carbon, and Nat has really explained most of those concepts. And year after year, with good or bad rains, is a drought. And this speaks to the problem is not necessarily in the rainfall patterns. Maybe we also have a shortfall in how we manage the rain that has come to our landscape. And so I'm going to go deep and quick into what holistic management is. It is a decision-making framework that helps us manage complexity. For most of us who manage organizations, economies, environments or our farms or our families or your own body, you know that there's many different parts that are moving at the same time. However, our training and science, which helps our world go around, which helps us make our management decisions every day, it is almost very difficult to know how many pieces are moving at each time and to see them clearly and take relevant action in time. And so we find that science is mostly reductionist. We look at things in silos, but when you're looking at the environment, every action has feedback. It might be feedback that we're looking for or feedback that was unintended or negative. But then with holistic management, it's a concept or a framework that was developed by Allan Savory that Natalie has already spoken about that helps us then look at our landscapes and everything that we manage through the complexity eye. So here are the few concepts, 4 of them, that are the main principles that guide the concept of holistic management. Everything is connected. So what you do on one spot feeds back to the rest of the cycle of life. So we belong to the web of life. Our actions are not separated to our ecosystems, our environments, and our economies and our societies. So an unstable environment, for example, or an unstable ecosystem may tend to have also social insecurity, business insecurities. And then the second concept is the brittleness scale, which, again, for lack of a better word, I wish we didn't use the big jargon, but then sometimes I think it expresses it better than to say dryland. Brittleness is the spread of precipitation across the year. So you may find a region with not very much rainfall, but a consistent presence of moisture means that there is consistent presence of decay and nutrient cycling and mineral cycling in the soil. Yet in our regions, for example, where I am, we have a specific period of moisture, of precipitation, which may be 3 to 4 months, and then a long dry spell. So that long dry spell, there's little or no growth at all, and everything is brittle. All the grass dries, it breaks, it stops to circulate any food into the soil. So it's what we call an open season because there is no growth, there is no biological activity. Yet if you looked at the Amazon or London, you know that there's biological activity throughout the year and the dynamics are different, and the species of animals found in those areas can tell you what is needed to manage those areas to thrive. So in a region that is in the dryland, when it is not moist or when there is no precipitation, where do we find moisture? We find it in the gut of an animal because ruminant animals will then provide the corrective conditions that are needed in their digestive system to promote decay or biological decomposition and to recycle nutrients. So again, to our topic of the day, we've heard the statement long enough. It actually was originated by someone from Savory, and it has since been adopted. So timing is everything. In grazing, time is more important than numbers. Natalie already told us about the 365 days. One animal throughout the year can overgraze in a plot of land than if you brought 100 animals for 1 or 2 days and move them out. They wouldn't overgraze. So overgrazing is really a concept of time, especially in the growing season. How much access is given to an animal to each plant. So, but we tend to blame the tool, which really is, we also have a role to play. I like what Nat said about humans being lazy and rather, the animal will sort itself out. And then animals tend to select and go for the plants that they desire or not, but until they finish them. Under continuous grazing, overgrazing during the rains happens because every time a plant is grazed, it loses its roots into the soil and then eventually will be uprooted, and then that's how you form deserts. Yet, if you focused on recovery, not necessarily rest, these are two different things. The animals move away so that the landscape may recover and regrow, and then you can have forage for the non-growing season and keep your land covered, which is one of the most important things that you need to capture water as you slow it down and feed the underground water recharge. And this is another picture. During the dry season, you can stay longer on your landscape, but be careful not to take out the stumps of the roots of the plant, because then you will then damage and also disadvantage your land when your rainfalls come. That's where you have flash flooding and you lose lots of your topsoil. So predator-prey relationship, we say in the African rangelands, or I don't know where you are, what we have learned, and also through the lens of what Allan has written and shared, is that grazing animal behaviors are impacted by pack hunting animals, lions, hyenas, leopards, all those. And so because they are constantly being hunted by some folks who need food from them, they will keep themselves in large herds and then protecting the young ones in the middle. So these are big multi-species herds of grazers or herbivores. And then because they are in that large jittery, their behavior is impacted. The pace that they move in, even in this picture, you can see a little bit of dust. And then they dung, they urinate, they are jittery with their hooves. And because there are so many, you can't stay around your dung and urine for a long time. They move away. And where they have moved, that place is left behind to recover. They have literally cultivated it and it is ready for rain. And usually when we then translate it to our heading principles and practices, we usually stay for 90 days. We do believe that the environment will have recovered. And in some places with better precipitation, 45 to 60 days, depending on where you are. So I would like to share with you a little video that alludes to this predator-prey relationship. Can we have a look at this video? It's a herd of buffaloes that are moving, but they have no pressure whatsoever. They are not being chased by any lion. They are truly unconscious of anything. So let's look at the landscape. Do we see any difference? Probably not. If it's there, it's very minimal. Let's look at the dynamics when you add a bit of pressure. And again, what we should remember is that it's not a pressure for the whole day, but lions don't have a span of long chasing. They will not chase it for a long time. So let's look when there is a predator introduced. Here is the same herd. So this is what we are saying. We look at our environments, we learn from them, and nature teaches us how we can manage our own seasonal rainfall environments or brittle environments, or as our language calls it, drylands. So this whole technical content, my job with most of our practitioners at Savory, is to then work with communities to help us understand how we can translate this information that we've learned from nature, that nature has generously so given us. How do we translate it to communal lands where land ownership systems are totally different, communally owned, everybody has to make a decision. And my main role here is to work with communities to make decisions together, collaboratively under traditional leaders as our guide, to then plan on bringing our heads together. And here is why. So maybe some of you guys who are on this call from your communities, you have large herds per family. But here in Southern Africa, in Zimbabwe, especially Western Zimbabwe where I am, on average, 8 to 10 animals, cattle, per family. So to have a big herd like we are managing now of 700, we have about 150 livestock owners. So we establish a shared vision because it's also building a social movement towards landscape level regeneration. And you set up a system for giving skills and sharing ecological skills with communities, ecological literacy, learning what the land is talking to us, what is it saying, how do we improve cover, how do we put down carbon, how do we improve our land's capacity to capture water, every raindrop, how do we harvest it at a landscape level, because we have thousands of hectares of land around us, and maybe some methods of capturing water may not be efficient for our landscapes that are so thirsty for water, even dry boreholes that are communicating that we are losing water than we are actually retaining. And again, on the reminder of the tools, grazing and animal impact, which is the actual act of grazing, the trampling, dunging, and urination. So this is a bit of the communities that I work with. It's 5 communities for now that our team is impacting with about 276 households and 700 cattle that we are moving in a holistically planned grazing. Quickly, I'll dive into the results because we have a few minutes left, about 3 minutes. What we have seen, June 2021, this landscape, because when you plan grazing, you are almost automatically rationing also your forage for your animals. So in June 2021, which is our dry season here, this is how this land looked. It was bare. You can see the soil. But when you do holistic plant grazing, June 2025, this is how it looks like currently. And here in the communal lands, we don't have fences or structured paddocks, but people use landscapes to demarcate. This is from a friend, Patrick Worms. He visited us with a group in 2024. And he took this photo from the landscape, an old photo, superimposed it on the current state of the land, diverse species of plants, grasses, legumes in the soil that are helping capture photosynthesis, produce food for animals, and eventually stability for the communities. So I really like this photo and I'll use it for as long as I have eyes. And then here we also work with communities to reverse what we call oxidization, or to trample grasses that have not been circulating nutrients and they are dead and gray. Some people call it mariban, but then you use your animals to come to the landscape, bunch them strongly, dung, urinate, they will dung and urinate on there. Before the rains even come, you start to see the shoots. So that means decay has been activated from the gut of the animal. And this is the same land plot that we tried killing the mariban. So you can see when it's growing season, there are new growth and new establishments of plants. And then because of all the cover and all the deep-rooted plants that over time farmers have been creating in their rangeland, we are now able to slow down water and to feed the underground water streams, which is what you would call your underground water recharge. And then now people can drill boreholes. Otherwise, we tend to give solutions to drill boreholes, but like, when did you harvest the water? And now this is what we can see literally taken this past month in June. Yes. So one community that preserved their grazing lands, now you do an exchange visit. They have the bottom community didn't do the plan, and then they can visit their neighbors. So you cannot say it didn't rain by us because they are in the same region, literally less than 10 kilometers apart. And then you have to have pillars that will support your livestock well-being, farmer well-being. And this is a group of men who own the livestock, they are herders. They also take care of the health of their animals, and I work with them on a daily. Now communities are also leading the documentation, capturing to see how many species of grass do we have. And now we recently took soil samples from our grazing areas to take them for testing to see how the soil is reporting. So we did unplant areas and plant areas. So in due course, I'm sure we'll be able to share some results. And accompanying this are some photos from our partners. This is in South Africa, a fence line photo, and the question is, where did it rain more? Watershed management. In an effective water cycle, water does not flow from flash flood and direct from the rain. Water flows from underground springs, clean, clear water. That's why our elders would drink from the streams, because it's naturally filtered and it comes from the sponge from under the ground. That's Africa Center. And then we use the same livestock tool to improve our food and seed systems, impacting our croplands to change the soil. The idea is if you have a healthy soil, you are likely to succeed in growing crops, and you practice all your regenerative principles. And here you can see two different types of soils. These are harsh soils, sandy, and very difficult to work with. But when you implement also relevant tools on that soil, you can see the difference. The bottom one is business as usual. The top one is using regenerative principles. And then farmers use water harvesting principles in their homes. And then in the landscape, the broader landscape, we use livestock. And to complete the whole cycle, we also introduce seed and food systems where we grow and eat our own natural foods around. So this is the full cycle now that I'm just giving of the whole facilitation. And I would like to quote from my favorite mentor and really a man that I honor, Allan Savory, who says, ultimately, the only wealth that can sustain any community, economy, or nation is derived from photosynthetic processes, which is green plants growing on regenerating soils. So I hope this was good. I know it was quick, but I hope I did manage to share a little bit of the visuals, at least from my context. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Precious. I love it. It's so hopeful. You know, all we hear is this negative narrative about animals and cows farting and the contribution to, you know, to climate change. So this is a very different story for a lot of people. And also, I wanted to mention that for those who attended the last Regenerative Speaker Series with Gabby Ludolf from Lush Cosmetics, Precious Phiri, since 2017, has actually been an active judge for the Lush Spring Prize, which provides prizes to indigenous groups around the world and local native groups that are doing lots of efforts in land regeneration around the world in different contexts. So we're all, you know, kind of part of this big global regenerative family.
I know, Gabby, that's amazing that you are here too.
She was our last speaker.
Really beautiful. Yeah, that's amazing.
So thanks, Precious. That was definitely concise and full of information and inspiration. I just want to open it up now. We've got 12 minutes left to open it up for Q&A. So feel free to raise your hands, put questions in the comments, however you'd like to do it. If anyone would like to ask a question, feel free. I'm not seeing if anyone, oh, yes, Qasim. Qasim is from our regional bureau of Cairo, based in in Egypt, based in Cairo.
We don't know the names right now, so we're and then Mina, Eastern Europe Regional Office in Cairo. Well, thank you very much, Precious and Natalie, for the great examples and information on some practices in different regions of the world. I know what I would compliment on your topic is projects that we've implemented in our region on reforestation and land reclamation versus herders, because unfortunately communities would compete within these two categories, if I may say. So we would favor more the reforestation practice. We as people working in the sector, we would favor reforestation activities, planting trees. And I'm talking about our region, which is known for drought, unfortunately, with the loss of water, with loss of vegetation. While definitely people, the herders, would love to raise their animals, find new feed. And in our region, usually herders, what they do, as you mentioned, they move from one place to another. So there's a good source of food. They hunt, they stay in this area until they completely remove all the vegetation and go to another location, and another location. However, within what Precious and Natalie mentioned is the importance of community consultation and community discussion. Okay, people in this region, what's your priority here? It's animal grazing. Definitely it's for animal grazing for herders, but we need to find a solution. And we had some success stories from Lebanon, if I remember, where, okay, we need to plant trees in this region, but at the same time, the people would love to regenerate or restore their forest that was burned previously or cut or even grazed. So what we did these tunnels between the forests. So, okay, herders would pass through these tunnels, which are gates or fences. So this is their land. They think, okay, this is their land. And usually in some areas, they fight and shoot. So we created these tunnels. So herders would pass through these tunnels, which is a protected area. But at the same time, we agree with these herders and animal growers that please keep this land for regeneration or replanting for at least 5 to 10 years. And we make sure that within this area, no animal herders are coming inside. But at the long run, animals play an important role in our region for forest fire protection because they eat the weeds and the leftovers.
Underbrush,
So it's exactly. So that's the importance of community consultation, discussing with the community, not imposing any of these activities to the community because you need to see their priorities. At the same time, we're protecting the nature, we're letting people live and create a livelihood opportunity for animals and animal raising, but at the same time as well, we're agreeing with the community on the priorities. And in that way, which goes back again into the controlled grazing. So after 5 years or 10 years, you open this land for grazing, eating the residues and weeds, but at the same time protecting the grown-up trees. So that's my compliment. It's not a question. Thank you very much. Over.
So Precious, within WFP and UN agencies, we have this we have this habit of saying over with the radio talk when we finish speaking. So yeah, no, Qasim, I mean, again, as I was saying earlier, there is no ecosystem without animals, and throughout human history, humans have been integrating animals together in forestry systems. For people who eat pork, there's the famous cork and pork example in Portugal and in Spain, where cork trees, to get the cork of wine bottles, are grown with pigs. Animals, goats can be really important in pest management, where fruit trees are dropping their fruits and rotting. That can create a breeding ground for diseases of those trees. But when you bring in chickens, ducks, goats, pigs, other animals, they're actually eating those rotting fruits and helping to protect. And also they are bringing their nutrient and organic matter to the trees as well, the nitrogen. So there are so many examples, and absolutely, as I was saying, Qasim, during my presentation, it's a governance question, right? I mean, there is no one managing the elephants and the wildebeest in the Masai Mara. They're not sitting there doing a rotational grazing plan. So it's really humans, the governance aspect of this that is gonna make or break it. And I'm sure that Precious can tell you, it often fails. In Wajir, where this was being tested, there were a number of pastoralists, and Precious, that is very precious that you guys have, small number of cows per family. If you go to South Sudan, you are talking about hundreds of cows for one family. So in Wajir, in the Somali part of Kenya, there was an effort made, and they were doing fine. They were abiding by the whole rotational grazing plan. But the minute that drought hit, they defaulted to the degenerative pattern, right? And so I'm sure you have had examples, Precious, of where people seemed on board, they wanted to do it, but at the end of the day, they just, so there are successes and failures like in any of the work that we do. But anyway, Precious, I just wanted to let you respond to Qasim. The non-question that he had, the comment, or if you had thoughts.
Yeah, no, to say also thank you for sharing the perspective. And truly, I think what's important for us who work in these regions is to know what are our people's priorities. And when we get the stories of our lands, you hear how much abundance used to be there. And when you track what happened, what went wrong, it really usually was our actions. And then now we have to build back on how do we get back to where we used to be, or at least some form of stability and biodiversity. And it may be through, we need to resolve how can we get water, how can we. So yes, consultative actions are important, and especially in places of insecurity. I've worked in Samburu with some partners as well. There's lots of insecurity and gun violence, but more than ever, I feel like when we put our indigenous peoples in the front, they are very determined to take action and to start those baby steps. And sometimes it takes just one plot of land to show what is possible. And then going on to Nat's comment on it's a rise and fall. Sometimes people panic when it's in a drought, and then they abandon the plan and they keep animals in one spot, not knowing that they are making their lives worse, because you are better off planning intensely when you are in a crisis so that you keep your animals alive longer through the hard season. And then if it means you are selling some animals and then keep the money to buy again when abundance comes. But it will all take lots of evolving and transformation from farmers. We had the worst drought in the El Nino, I think for most of you guys, but in Southern Africa, in our country alone, I mean, thousands of animals were lost. But even with neighboring villages, hundreds of animals were lost. And then amongst the 5 groups that we are working with, only 12 were lost. So you can see that there is a big difference, and farmers can have a better resilience, and especially if they adopt a little bit of the plans. They're never perfect, and I don't think it will ever be, because this is so, there's too many things that are moving at the same time, but one step towards the right direction is all that we need.
And there's no finish line, there's only a starting line.
Yeah. And growth.
So I see Pauline has a question, and actually I wanted to bring up, you mentioned Samburu. Pauline is here as well. We did last year a ecosystem restoration boot camp with the Samburu in Samburu tribe and pastoralists in Samburu, and we focused on one hill that has been so degraded, like the village is melting away. You can't even believe, the gullies are so deep, and now cheetahs and other people are in there, enjoying the coolness during the day. But they, it was the community that decided, no, we have to have our own social contract, no grazing in this area for minimum 1 year, let the land come back. But that is only the starting point. You can't just recover. And it's like addiction. You can't just recover and be like, okay, now I can go back to that behavior. But anyway, let me hand it over to Pauline for a question or comment.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, Precious, for the presentation that you have shared. And indeed, the issue, as Natalie and also Precious is saying, is the issue around governance. So my question is to Precious. So in terms of embedding or the interlinkage between this kind of formal and informal governance related to the holistic grazing management, what has the experience been in the places that you've been working, and what would be essentially the lessons? Because we know that these pastoral communities are really traditional, and we see that over time also the formal governance frameworks. For example, in Kenya, we have the counties, the devolved government systems that are setting up their own, legislation respective to the issues around these places. So what has the experience been, or what would best practice there look like? And then just to link again on the issue of the numbers, the number of stocks. I mean, you've given an example where in some of the places where you're working, the herds are quite small, if we may say that. But then you look at Kenya, and in most of our dryland areas, you find that the one household has, quite the number of animals that are grazing in these areas all the time. So does this, you mentioned that this holistic grazing management system is sort of like a decision-making support tool and process. So again, in terms of best practice, what would the process of engaging with communities in terms of determining appropriate stocking rates sort of look like? And have you had any form of success in this kind of space? Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Pauline.
Polly. Sorry, I think somebody has a mic that's unmuted. If you wouldn't mind muting that, thanks.
Thank you, Pauline, and an important question. Maybe let's start first with governance. I feel like with governance, if you have a strong traditional leadership system, it's always good to rob them in to produce what we would call social bylaws. But here, if people do not follow the pattern of we are grazing here at this time, if someone encroaches, they can be taken to the chief or the senior village head and sort of charged. But generally, there is a structure of grievances and handling those kind of issues because it's at a communal level and no one owns this land, but it's based on community-based agreements. And so to put in the structure of support, then you have bylaws. But at a local governance level, you work with extension officers, government extension officers, who are then your key stakeholders who will help because also businesses consistently love regenerated landscapes, right? So if you work with the local offices of the district, you have to have an MOU with the local rural district council to share that we are doing grazing areas or grazing management in these landscapes so that it is known that this is what you're doing and maybe protect because rural land is state-owned here. And so if you are not known what your activities are and there's a reporting structure, that helps in safeguarding. But at a communal level, in terms of tying things together, I don't know what structures are found in your areas. There's the district development committees here, which is political arms and traditional arms. They can work together to help support the progression. And then we come to herd numbers. Definitely, pastoralists in Kenya have much larger herds than we do, but also you have enough land, the same amount of land. Imagine that you guys have the most diverse wildlife. Your numbers are incomparable. People flood and flock to Kenya to watch wildebeest migrating. And that landscape has never complained an inch because there is that movement that Natalie was talking about, the natural predator-induced movement. So imagine if we just copied that same principle from that land and we brought it to the human side where humans dwell. You have thousands of hectares and enough animals to bring a revolutionary change on those landscapes. When I worked with a group in Samburu land, it was where there's Northern Rangelands Trust, but I was mostly working with Gravis Zebra Trust. So I spent time with both teams. And even to date, they have places that they have started to use as, I think, just demo sites, showcasing, look, our land that was oozing and losing all the water, and we have a river that is brown with our soil flowing away. Look how much grass we have grown. And so now can we imagine? And there is no limit to what strategies people can use. Depends on what resources are accessible to you. Who are your partners? Who are your research partners who are helping you? What are those baby transitional steps that we will take to enable our land to start being able to carry the capacity of the animals we have now? How are you carrying the current animals that you have now? Can you imagine a future where you don't even have to worry because you have done so much planning with relevant tools and relevant partners, considering resources that are at your exposure? In one of the villages in Samburu, it was called Sasab. And usually before I start the trainings, I ask, what's the meaning of your community? The name Sasab. They're like, oh, Sasab is a healing tree. It's a medicinal tree. It's an important tree. I'm like, oh my God, show me. Like, nah, it is not here. So there's lots of stories where even species have disappeared. They were there, and they believe roots can stay and seeds can stay in our soils. I meant seeds can stay in our soils for hundreds of years. The soil is just waiting for the conditions to be right. So, Pauline, to answer your question, I think we can use the holistic management principles and the toolbox to then help us make the decisions that will give us those baby steps. It may be demo sites. It may be just a few villages saying we are going to try this, and then exponentially things can start to ripple out.
Thanks so much, Precious. So we're a little bit over time, so we can start to wrap it up. There was our colleague Pierre from FAO had questions about Mongolia. I can ask you offline, Precious, if you have examples from Mongolia. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that context, but we can figure out if there's an answer for him. And then Abuni Joseph was just noting that in his context in South Sudan, there was a family that invited livestock to his land during the dry season for shelter for a few weeks, and later used the land for planting sorghum during the rainy season. So that's a very simple example. But I also just wanted to reiterate the importance of the function of the ecological function. The science we can rely on. We can rely on the biology and the ecology. That is a given. So the principles and the function are the core, and then all of these, the software, the governance, the human relationships, the contracts, the commitment, the vision, the management, all of that is really the tough part. That's not a given, right? I think we don't have time for additional questions or comments now. For those wondering why is WFP having a webinar on holistic management, it's just because we are trying to further the conversation around regenerative concepts. It's not, it's not part of our mandate to be having livestock management programs per se, but we operate in communities that are becoming increasingly more vulnerable to extreme events, violent weather behavior. And so it helps us to, to sensitize us to some of the root causes of those vulnerabilities and what are some things that we might be able to advocate for in terms of adaptation, regeneration, and proactively healing the landscapes. It is very possible to do this. It takes time, but like I said, the ecology, the biology, that's something that we can definitely count on. Again, this session has been recorded. Then the WFP team will be able to see that internal recording. And then I will also upload this to my YouTube channel, which is just Natalie Topa. We do have some external guests here and friends of WFP who are interested in this topic. And so I think I just want to wrap it up here. Thank everyone for joining in today. The goal is inspiration, pollination. And so hopefully we've done that. And I'll hand it over to Precious if you want to say any last remark.
No, except to say thank you so much for your time today, and I hope we can catch up often online. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook. I'm not a very good Facebooker, but if you probably message me, I'll respond. But thank you so much for your time, and thanks, Nat and Serena, for all the support.
Yeah, and I've included some resources, Allan Savory's TED Talk, a video on holistic management. I've also included Precious Google Trust website and her email here. And hopefully, Precious, when you come back to Nairobi, we can go again for Ethiopian food and talk about soil and all things regeneration.
Yeah.
Thanks,
cool.
Precious. See you everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Good day.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.